and welcome back to another episode of Conversations, the show where we talk about the types of conversations that maybe we're not having enough of, but maybe if we had more of, we would find a lot more humanness in society and in work. So we're here, as always, to have that type of conversation with you all today. And did you notice how I said you all, although that's the Canadian version of y'all? This is a conversation for all of us. So while Tracy and Sejal are here, and we're going to learn more about Sejal in a minute, this is a conversation for all of us. And today we're talking about belonging, which is a mashup of two different concepts, which is this concept of longing for something which we don't have, and how the concept of belonging can change our experience when it comes to longing. And this, as you can probably imagine, touches all places in our lives. It touches personal, it touches work, it touches all the things. So there's no like, hey, come to work and you can just be out of belonging and feel really great about that and then go home and be in belonging. Or maybe you don't have belonging at home either. Like there's a lot of complexities that are going to come up in our conversation today. And if there's anything in particular that any of our wonderful audience members are experiencing when it comes to longing or belonging, things in your past that you have experienced that you would like to bring to the table today, we would love to have all of those things on the table. So please put them in the chat and we will bring them into the conversation. And as always, I'm not here just to talk about myself for an hour because that would be I think that would be boring. I think some of you guys might like that, but I don't want to do that. And so I'm here to hang out with Sejal today. And we could talk about many things, but specifically, we're going to be talking about belonging. The journey from longing to belonging today. So Sejal, let everyone know a little bit more about who you are and why this topic is so near and dear to your heart.
Thank you, Tracy. So excited to be here with you. I always look forward to all of our conversations. So a little bit about myself. I'm an employment law attorney. I've been licensed in California since about 2003 and practicing employment law, strictly employment law. And, I had my son about 10 years ago. And when I had him, that's really where my journey to belonging started. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going. But really, this topic is one that's near and dear to my heart, Tracy, because, it goes all the way back to my childhood. And as you know, I've done 2 different TEDx talks. And on the first one, I really focused in on one aspect of my identity and sort of what I'd gone through in my childhood, being on the sort of receiving end of prejudice and bias and how that impacted my journey. And so that's what I focused in on the first talk. And then when I got approached to do another one, it really started me to sort of look inwards to say, there is something else in my story that I haven't really shared that I think could help a lot of people. And as I started thinking about what that topic would be, this one just jumped right out at me because I really wanted to help people understand that, we all have different cultural identities. For me, my parents are immigrants from India. I was born in Chicago and grew up in a predominantly Italian neighborhood. And kind of growing up in between both cultures, not feeling like I belong to either one or fit into either one, that has shaped a lot of who I am today. And so I'm really passionate about this topic and I can't wait for us to get right into it.
Okay, I think this gives us a really great place to start because in the conversation about belonging, I don't even know if I'm going to pick a number, millions of different definitions of what belonging is. And for me, belonging is, at the end of the day, really comes down to a feeling. Do I feel like I belong here? Do I feel like I don't? And so often we are presented with, I'll call them opportunities to belong into these different hard-coded arenas, right? Like here's a culture, here's a neighborhood, here's a company with specific values, right? And there's all these boxed areas of belonging. And I would love to hear your experience, Sejal, because mine was very much here's a place and you want to belong or you don't want to belong in it. You want to belong, and you have to change something about yourself which is more fitting in than actually belonging. But I'd love to hear your experience as well from a life and a work perspective.
Yeah, great starting point, because you're right. I think a lot of people do define belonging differently. And for me, it is that feeling that you belong to, either a group of people or to yourself, to something that's bigger than yourself, where you feel like you're a part of something, you're collaborating, you're co-creating with a group of people. And, a perfect example for me right now is this group that I belong to called Inclusive Leadership in a Virtual World. We meet every Wednesday. It's a completely voluntary. The people on the executive team are donating their time to this group. The same consultants, it's a group of like 30 to 50 people that show up week after week. And every time I invite somebody new to that group, I know I've invited you there too, and I'm waiting for you to drop in. It's the same thing. It's like you immediately feel like everyone is there for like a shared purpose. We appreciate each other's energy. We uplift each other. We support one another, and we make time for each other. And that's where I feel like, as an example of where I belong. It's, you have to be intentional about it. A lot of times, like you were saying, people feel like I should belong in my family because they're my family. And for me, that wasn't the case. I grew up feeling like I didn't belong in my family. And we can, again, talk more about that as we get going. But so that's sort of the definition that I go by. And when I talk about going from longing to belonging, it's exactly what you're saying. It's that feeling that you have inside of you where you don't fit in, or you're not sure if you're being valued or you're being heard or you're being seen for who you are.
I really love what you said about making time for each other, because I think this is one of the critical maybe break points in the work relationship, right? And I've had people who have had their bosses tell them that I pay you this amount and therefore I own your time. Okay. So now it's not me making time for you. It's me being contracted to spend a certain amount of time here and on this work. And I don't think those two things have to be mutually exclusive, but I also don't think those two things by default come together, right? Like if I've signed an employment agreement with you, that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, once I get to know the company, once I get to know the team, that I actually want to make time for this every day. I will, because I'm contracted to, but I don't know that I want to make time for it. And I think that that's a really great way to start looking at belonging, because for one, I have conversations with so many of the group members, but the time of the weekly thing is like right when I have to pick up my son from school, and it is very inconvenient. So at some point I will be here. But this is you choosing, right? I choose to spend my time with these people because there's something meaningful in that to me. So tell me more about that, and maybe more of your journey, Sejal, and like what it feels like to not have that.
It's so true, Tracy, what you just said. I mean, it really is. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about my story, but just to kind of set that up is in my second TEDx talk. Again, the video will be coming out soon. I give everybody a framework. If you've seen my first one, I love acronyms, and it just helps me remember. And so I created a new acronym in this second TEDx talk with the word power. And I'll kind of walk you through some of that as we talk about the conversation. But what I love about this the talk that I did was, what I do is I show people, someone like me who didn't have support growing up, who didn't have resources, who was dealing with harassment, discrimination, who was dealing with this cultural identity clash, feeling like didn't fit in to belong to either one, and not having the resources, how I dealt with feeling a lack of belonging growing up, and the unhealthy way, I like to call it, of not knowing how to deal with my pain that I felt from not belonging, and sort of how that played out in my life. And then what I also do is I'm trying to show in the talk is that we can change that. We don't have to just feel that lack of belonging and be victims to it, that we do have the power to change that And so I show and share a story of my son's a situation where he felt a lack of belonging. And I kind of try to show the parallel of how I went to belonging in my journey because of my situation, and a healthy way of when a child is supported, when they do have the resources, when they are taught different ways of dealing with their feelings, their pain, and they have the support and resources, how they get to belonging. And so I do this really beautiful dance between my story and his story to share and hopefully give people hope that, we can make a decision. It's never too late. And you do have that power. It's just a matter of taking that power back. And so that's why I use that acronym, power, to kind of share how you harness the power of exclusion, go from longing to belonging. As far as my personal story, there's been a lot of situations where I felt a lack of belonging. This is nothing that only has happened to me. It happens to so many people. And this is why I picked this topic and that I'm really passionate about it, because it's something that most of us strive for and that we have to depend on each other for. We can do a lot of the work in my power framework on our own, but we started off with surrounding ourselves with people and making a decision to intentionally spend time with certain people. And so I'll talk about that. But so the example that I share in my talk about what happened to me when I was a child is really sort of my moment of where I realized that sometimes, no matter how hard we try to fit in or how hard we try to belong, we just don't. And that's just the reality, right? And there was that moment that we all go through that in our lives. And my moment was when I had a history class in elementary school, and there was a session that we were going to be talking about India. Now, I was the only Indian besides my brother in our entire elementary school. It was predominantly Italian. And so imagine me sitting in a room full of people, right, as the only Indian person. We're talking about India. This is a topic that I feel proud to know a lot about. I like my culture. I love dressing up in Indian clothes. I love eating. I mean, I grew up inside the house as culturally Indian. So this was something that I was proud to know a lot about and wanted to share more about it. And then we get to the textbook, right? And the only good thing and Tracy, you and I could talk about the textbook thing for another hour, but the only good thing in the textbook was about India was one picture of the Taj Mahal. That was it. But everything else was really literally trashing my cultural identity of India, the poverty, the slums, the filth, the pregnant brides, the arranged marriages, all the negativity surrounding India. And I'm sitting in the classroom as the only Indian person. You can imagine how that felt, right? And that was the moment where I shared this in my talk, where I literally felt like a lightning bolt, struck through my body in that moment. And I felt completely alone in a room full of people. And that was that moment where I was like, what am I doing here? Because no matter what, I'm not fitting in. I mean, I obviously don't look like everybody else in this classroom. There's nothing I can do to change the color of my skin or my cultural identity, and I shouldn't have to. But then you have to acknowledge that. And when you get to that point, that's the pivot. That's where you can take your power back, right? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I love this, because these are the types of conversations that were not part of the narrative when I was growing up, right? No one ever said there will just be places where you don't belong.
Right.
And that's okay.
That's right.
This is one of the things that I'm so passionate about now, is that there is a place for everyone to belong.
Yes.
But not everyone belongs in all places. And it's not every place's job to make everybody belong either, because
That's true,
right? I can't know every single person's experience and know that they can belong here. I don't know that, but I can know enough about what it looks like to belong here to make that information available to people so they can align with it or not align with it. And for me, so my son is almost 5, and even now, he started preschool this year. And part of our conversation is that school is for learning specific things, not even for learning all things, right? At his age, they're learning how to read, how to write, right? These are good life skills. I believe in this. What school is not meant for is to teach you about you. And so there are going to be some times where you run into a conflict there. And it doesn't mean that the school structure is going to change. But what it does tell you is it shows you there's a difference that I have between me and this structure, or me and this other person, and that's okay. And we're not like, I don't know, if everybody here, actually, let's take a poll of the people who are here. I would love to hear your answers. Who here went through school feeling like they belonged all the way through? Because I would think it's much more unusual to feel like you belonged all the way through. Even for the people who took put so much time, effort, and energy into trying to fit in. I feel like this is one of my greatest gifts, is that I never bothered to do that. Like, if you don't like me, you don't like me. That's fine. I have friends, right? Megan is saying never, right? And nor I, Megan, nor I, which is why I put it out there, because the space hasn't been intentionally created for you to belong there. And again, nor can it, especially in like a public school scenario, right? We don't know enough about individual people in order to create that possibility. But the first step is knowing that, okay, this is that place, and this is me, and we don't belong together. And that's okay. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with me, and that doesn't mean there's something wrong with this space.
Right.
So Sejal, what is your experience on that like splitting you, but also not saying that one of these two things is bad?
Well, and this is the thing, right? We're not taught what to do. So when that pain happens, right, for me, started very early in my childhood, like literally from the time I was born, because my parents, I was conceived in India and born in Chicago. And then my parents moved here. They barely spoke English. And so as a child, when you grow up and you feel like you don't even fit in or belong, they're not accepting you for who you are in your own home, that pain starts to happen. And then the incidents just continue to compound, right? What happened in my classroom, what I talked about in my first TEDx talk, where somebody taped a note to my locker that said, "Go back to your country." There is no belonging when someone's telling you to go back to your country. And by the way, this is my country. I was born here, right? So that's another conversation. But point being is that like these things continue to add on. It's repeated trauma, and we are not taught what to do with that. So in my power framework, in my second talk, the P is for pain, is that's the first step, is that we have to recognize that we're all going through feeling like we don't belong in some situation, whether it's in our family, whether it's in our schools, whether it's our not being invited to someone's wedding, or at work, we're not invited to a meeting, anywhere. But that it continues to pile on until you face your pain. And so the P in my new power stands for pain, is that it's for me, I didn't face my pain for many years. I didn't know how to. And so I just ran from it. I tried to cope. I numbed, right? I did whatever I had to get through it, but I didn't face it. I didn't deal with it. I didn't learn how to address it. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have any support. I didn't have I couldn't talk to my parents. I couldn't talk about that to my teachers at school. I didn't have anybody. And so it continued on pretty much my whole life and was negative, and it damaged me in a lot of ways until I finally got to that point where I was like, I need to address this inner storm that's going on inside of me, because there's no way I can be a parent to my son. And it was literally that moment that I laid my eyes on him. I mean, he was born at 4 pounds. I could literally remember it. And it was like the light bulb went off, and I'm like, open up your heart and let's do this. You got to deal with your pain, because there's no way you can love this child until you love yourself. And that means including your pain. And so I talk about and give strategies in the talk about, we all do it differently. We're all on different journeys. So it's not like you feel that pain and you start dealing with it. It's sometimes it takes a while, but you have to at some point get to that place where you say, I have to address this pain, no matter how harmful it is. Because if you don't, then what ends up happening is that it just continues going on, and then you're only harming yourself in the long run. Or you end up like us when we have kids, we end up projecting it onto our kids, to our loved ones, to other people in our lives, because we haven't fully dealt with it. So again, it continues to just harm ourselves and people around us until we actually get to the point where we're willing to face the pain. And that is the hardest, literally the hardest part, because most of us would much rather not even deal with that, right? So,
and I think that that's an important thing to take into consideration. If your desire is to go on this journey from longing to belonging, it doesn't exist without pain. And Tim is sharing here that the self-belonging is often a first step we need to take before we can truly be able to belong externally. And I feel like self-belonging and like group belonging is like a chicken and an egg thing, right?
yes.
Like we really need to have both. And can you really figure out which one came first? I mean, I've seen scenarios where people can identify that, or they can feel, right? They can feel like they belong here. And it's different than like just being psychologically safe, right?
Yes.
There's a level of belonging that like you feel these are my people, right? And that it would be cool if we could accomplish that without going through the journey of healing from our pain, but it's just not possible.
That's right.
And I think too, like I'd like to bring this in because also like Tim was talking about belonging versus aspects of inclusion, and there's like a whole realm of inclusion factors that aren't all the way to belonging, right? And I think while again, it's important to look for these things, right? Like, are people being intentionally excluded? Okay, there's some things that we should do over there. But when it comes to this concept of going through your pain, that is like, I feel like I can be seen for my authentic self without going through my pain. So then I'm still potentially limited from that full expression of belonging. But there are people, and I would hope that those of you who are listening in today see that Tracy and Sejal are these type of people who welcome in the conversation to say, like, we see you, we believe in you finding a place to belong. Whether or not this place is the place is a separate conversation, but that everybody is deserving of belonging. And I feel like that community aspect is very supportive, maybe not 100% necessary, but very supportive in being able to go through that pain healing journey, because it just can suck.
It's so true. Well, the first step is you have to acknowledge it. That even to get to that point it's really hard, you know. And I just want to say that out loud. Like, it took me years. Like, literally, I faced my pain, I can tell you, was 10 years ago. So I've gone a long time without acknowledging it or not knowing how to deal with it, you know. And then I look at a situation that my son went through. You know, I remember, like, I picked him up from school, and this was like the timing and how, Tracy, everything happens for a reason, right? Because I had no intention of doing a second TEDx talk, right? That wasn't on my list. I mean, the pandemic hit my business pretty hard, you know, and so I did my first one right at that time, and I was like, okay, I gotta focus on getting my business off the ground. It was starting to go, and then this opportunity came, and I was like, I don't know, you know, it's a lot of work to do this thing, and it's a lot of healing, but it's a lot of going back and reliving experiences that I've gone through. It's very painful to go through that again, right? But I decided to do it after. So what happened was, I got a call from somebody on LinkedIn that had followed me, and they were putting together a TEDx for the first time nearby. And they're following me on LinkedIn and said, we would love to invite you to speak. And I was like, okay, let me think about it. Literally 2 days after. So I said I was going to take a week to think about it, to figure out my topic and everything. And then I pick up my son from school. And when I picked him up from school, he came in the car, he chit chat, he's sitting in the back, and I'm like, how was school, honey? And like, right away, he says, Mommy, I feel left out. And I was like, I felt that sting, right? Like, I've gone through it in my own life and it hurt, but this was like even more intense because now it was my own child feeling excluded, right? And I stopped there. And so I took a deep breath. You know, I didn't want to overreact and make all kinds of assumptions, but I was like, honey, tell me what happened. And he started telling me this story about how one of the friends that he was hanging out with at school, all of a sudden, like, stopped hanging out with him, wasn't playing basketball with him, and for no apparent reason, just like made him feel left out. And so we talked about it and how he handled that situation in that conversation where he was so open with me. He was so vulnerable with me. When I would ask him questions, he would like pause, he would take a deep breath, and he would think about like what was going on. And it made me realize that like his openness and willingness to talk about this conversation of that feeling that he was feeling avoided him from rushing to judgment, which is what most of us do when we're feeling left out. Or we turn around and we start becoming exclusionary ourselves towards that person. But because he had support, he had someone he could talk to about it, he was able to see the big picture and he was able to empathize with his friend, right? And so, and then also what got me in that conversation was he was also willing to like talk about how he could reconnect with this friend that had made him feel left out. And that's really what got me thinking, because I'm like, in the workplace, when we feel excluded, what do? Tell me, like, what have you think of a situation, Tracy, at work when you felt left out? How did you respond? I'm just curious.
The visualization I get is this.
Right?
Not that it actually came to throwing punches, but it was like, you picked that, I picked this, we're on opposite sides, and we can never see eye to eye.
Right. Because we don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. I mean, there's a reason why incivility and these kinds of behaviors continue in the workplace, is because people see it happening. It's not like people don't know it's happening. Everybody knows it's happening, but most of the time they just don't know what to do and they don't know what to say. So they do what I did again, hide and numb, not bring it up, not talk about it for a long time. And then you just end up feeling like you get closed off. Mm-hmm. Now what you do is you're creating the situation where that feeling that you have is going to become your reality of I don't belong. And now you're going to see everybody through that lens, and you're going to make assumptions. You're going to make judgments, and then it's going to just continue to escalate until you properly deal with it. Right. So all of these things we're talking about is really why I started my business in the first place, because I'm like, why am I waiting till the lawsuit is filed to help people? Like, we could do this proactively. It's not rocket science, but these are the so-called soft skills that people were not taught, you know? I mean, you don't want me, and I say this a lot, but when I look at how I was raised and how conflict was dealt with at home, believe me, that you don't want in any workplace. You don't want anybody resolving conflict in that way. It was not healthy, right? But we don't know. And so I'm hoping that when people see this talk, they learn a few different strategies, that there are healthy ways of doing it. And that's just after you acknowledge your pain, then you have to be open and willing, right? Like he was open and willing to reconnect, figure out like, okay, my friend's not playing with me in basketball, but he's playing football. And we went through this whole conversation of, well, why don't you play football? I don't want to play football. It's not my thing. But then he realized, well, maybe I need to step out of my comfort zone. If I really want to reconnect with my friend, I'm going to have to do some things too. Now, that being said, there are some situations where you don't want to belong in that situation, where it's not healthy. If it's a toxic work environment, for example, then you need to make the decision. Like, you can surround yourself with people that are positive and supportive and that uplift you, but you have to make that choice, right? And so if you don't make that choice, then you're going to stay in that feeling of lack of belonging, because you're not going to be able to see past that situation, right? So
yeah. I think that there's a really important piece here that you just touched on that is another important contributing factor to actually having that belonging is choice. Yes. And we talked about it right at the beginning. We choose to make time with specific people. And I think I think in life in general and work as well, right? Like, we don't actively choose. We feel like choices have been made for us, and different people have different relationships with like accepting that, right? Like accepting circumstances. And I'm one of those, like, I hate status quo. I don't believe in it, right? Like, it might be good today, but that doesn't mean it's going to be good 3 years from now. So let's explore where we could go with this. Which is an important piece of like my belonging formula, because people who are good with the way things are generally aren't my best peeps. Right. And I believe that there is space for that, for all of these things. Like there's space for people to be football players. There's space for people to be basketball players. And I don't have to play football and basketball, but this is important to know. Like, okay, maybe we grew up playing all these sports together, right? And now I've decided that basketball is my thing, and my friends decided that football is his thing, and that's okay. And we can be friends at the same time. We may not play the sports together and choose our time that same way, but and there's also something to be said, especially about like friendships as you evolve as a human, right? Like there's people that are really important in your life at a given time and in a given space. And that doesn't mean that that person is supposed to have that same role for you your entire life.
That's
and
right.
I always see this like really, I think it's most prominent in like spousal relationships. So we're like, hey, I picked you when we were 26, and now we should be exactly the same when we're 48. Right? And you're like, well, that's maybe we forgot a piece of the human experience, which is evolution, that happens, and different beings evolve at different stages. And like for me, I had specific relationships with people before I had my son. Then I had this like parent persona, and it changed who I was, and it changed the things that were important to me, and it changed the people I belonged with. And then I became an entrepreneur, and that also changed the people I belong with. And it also made, but not in the way, like, I make it sound simple, right? So you can be like, oh, hey, now I'm a parent, so all parents are my people. Nope. Now I'm an entrepreneur, so all entrepreneurs are my people. No, that one was a drastic no for me. I'm like, wow, where do I actually fit in this community of people? Because I don't want to buy someone else's solution. I want to like figure out my own path, and like, where are the people who are doing that? But like, these are the things that we learn about ourselves, and we have to give ourselves that permission to say like, okay, there's nothing wrong with me because I have evolved. And I can like love and appreciate you for the friendship that we had and that role that you played in my life. And we aren't best friends anymore.
Yes.
And that's okay.
I totally resonate with everything that you're saying. And like, if you were to look at the people that I spent my time with prior to the pandemic and who I'm close to now, completely different, 100% completely different. And this is a lesson that I learned way too late in my life. And so for anybody that's watching this, if this can help you, if you walk away with nothing else in this entire conversation, this is it, right? This is the one key learning point, is that it's not, we have to be intentional with the energy that we're giving, but also receiving. And that's the part, right? Like, I've always been a giver. That's just who I am. I'm a nurturer. I'm a giver. You can ask any one of my friends that is at any point in my journey and in my life, they were like, she is the person. If we needed anything, we could call Sejal. She's going to be there for us in a heartbeat. She's going to have our back. She's going to stand up for us, both put us up physically in harm's way and not, right? Like, that's me. That's just who I am. That's never going to change. So I'm a giver. But the part that I didn't learn until later was that I also have to be intentional with the energy that I'm receiving. And so if I'm not receiving the energy that's uplifting me, or I'm not feeling valued, I need to think about that. And it doesn't matter whether it's a work relationship. It doesn't matter if it's a dating relationship, if it's a relationship with my family members, whoever. But if I'm getting some energy back and it's not making me feel positive and uplifted, which is where I'm at in my life, in my mind, in my heart, that's where my soul's at. But now if someone's draining me of that, or they're making me feel dissonance between my core values, which is what I'm trying to live my life according to, is my core values. I can't control what you do or what anybody else does. I can only control what I do. And my purpose now is to just live with my core values. But when I start feeling that dissonance in my actions and my behaviors, I need to stop. and reevaluate, like, am I surrounding myself with the right people? Because it does make a difference. It makes a whole lot of difference. Like, whenever I start feeling down, right, people always joke around like, you're on LinkedIn way too much, and I'm like, yes, I know that. I don't, no problem with that. Like, if it doesn't work for you, that's great, but it's because I literally will go on LinkedIn when I'm starting to feel that drain of energy, or I'm starting to feel frustrated, or the mountains are getting too big for me to move. I go on LinkedIn and I will go through like a half an hour or hour of just thanking everyone, congratulating everybody, like practicing my gratitude, connecting with people like Tim West and you and other like Summer Watts, people that I'm connected to. And all of a sudden, like half an hour later, I'm feeling all right. I've got my team here. I've got people who've got my back, because I can do a lot on my own. I trust myself. I've lived a lot, I've gone through a lot. And so I know, but we can't do everything by ourselves. And so part of this talk goes back to when you do the work and you apply this framework to get your own sense of belonging. Part of that is also now who you surround yourself with, because when you surround yourself with the wrong people, even though you might feel like you belong inside of you and you can bring your authentic self, they're going to bring you down, right? And so yes, you'll still have the sense of belonging anywhere you go, but why not make that even a much better experience? Surround yourself with people who get you, who value your energy, right? And who are going to give back to you just like you're giving to them. It's huge.
Oh. Okay, so let me ask you this, Sejal. This is going to sound like a simple question, which is it's a super complex answer, I'm sure. But like, is belonging yours to create?
Yes, I think, again, going back to how you define a belonging, in my definition of belonging, it's yes, absolutely. It's your choice. You have the power. And again, I'm not saying that it's easy. So I am not saying it's easy. It's probably really, really one of the most difficult things you have to do, because it means that you have to take a good look at yourself, the real you, in all of the different parts of you. Because for a long time, I tried to hide parts of my identity because it was much easier to try to fit in or try to please everybody than doing easier, right? And then you realize it's not really easier. It's just causing me harm. But as I started to do the work for myself, and that's why, this story is about me, because I've done the work and I'm continuing to do the work. I will always be doing this work. But as I started to become more inclusive of all of the different parts of me, that's where I started feeling that feeling of belonging to myself. And it was like a light bulb went off, like a breath of, that's what I call it in the talk. It's like a breath of fresh air. When you feel that way, where you could just be yourself, no matter where you go. It doesn't matter what people think. Like, I just posted, this is a funny one. I just posted a picture of me in a hat, right? Nobody Studios, we got our merch, we just recently got our merchandise, and one of it's a hat, which I love. So I posted a picture of it. It's not your typical professional picture that you might expect on, business platform, LinkedIn, whatever. But you know what? It's a part of who I am. I show up at Nobody Studios exactly like who I am. I'm not trying to be somebody that I'm not there or anywhere, And so if somebody's going to look at that and they're like, well, we're not going to bring her in to train our workshop, that's okay. That's okay. That you're entitled to that. But people that truly know me and who get me and understand what I'm out there doing are going to know, like, that's just who she is. Like, that's a part of who she is. And I accept that. And if you're not willing to accept it, then that's okay too. Right. So we don't have to have everybody in our, in fact, like I think most people would say that, you could count your trusted folks on like two hands, right? Or, it's a small group of people that you really truly need to uplift you and to help you in those times when you need them, right?
Yeah. Although I would also say on that front, so I remember having this experience. So when I was young, moved to Vancouver, so like big Canadian city, right? From the prairies. And I had this experience that everybody had a quota of friends and it was already full. Right. And I did like now, because we all like, it's like we made all of our friends in school and now our quota is full. And it's not that people were like particularly mean, but like I wasn't welcomed into a group. And so in that moment, I was like, one, I don't believe we can ever have too many people who make us feel like we belong. And 2, I better go create this for myself if
That's
I want to
right.
have it, right? So I was like, okay, people aren't inviting me places. I'll invite them places, right?
Yeah.
And I did that. And it's so interesting because even to this day, and these people, like, I don't see them very often. Like, some of them I haven't seen for 10 years, maybe now, but they still
Mhm.
hold a very special place in my heart. And the next time I go there, I will call them. And
Yep.
maybe I'll see them and maybe I won't because of scheduling. But like, those people become meaningful to you in those ways.
Yes.
And that's because I invested in them, in giving them an opportunity to be meaningful to me and not waiting for an invitation.
That's right. And that, one of the, as I was going through this journey, something that keeps coming up, and as you were talking, like this thought just popped into my head, is that, we need to talk about our stories more, because what we're told growing up is, don't talk about that. It's personal. Don't talk about it at work. When you're friends, you got to put on that face of everything's great. You see people posting on Facebook and LinkedIn how their lives are just awesome all the time, right? Great. Good for them, because my life isn't awesome all the time, unfortunately. But you know what? It's okay, because I've learned so much along the way. And one of the things that keeps coming back is, as we talk about our stories with each other and get to know each other for who we are, you start to realize you're not alone.
Yeah.
You start to connect at a deeper level. So like, if I'm working with you and like 4 other people, and you and I have had this conversation, and I need someone's help, or I need to help somebody else, who do you think I'm going to help first? Tracy, because I connected with Tracy. I know her story. I know, and if we have the similar story, like we're talking about right now, where we both felt a sense of belonging, that's going to deepen our bond. So a lot of times it's the things that we have in common with each other, even those painful experiences, that are going to deepen our bonds with each other. So a lot of the people that I'm connected to deeply on LinkedIn are people that I've never even met in person. But we've had a video chat, we've talked on the phone, and we've shared our story with each other, that we feel that deep connection. And then when I see them in person, I'm like, oh my God, I already knew you before I even saw you in person, right? Because you're like, we've connected. Versus the person that sat next to you at your office for 10 years that you've never asked that question to, you just walk by every day.
Right. Well, and this is like, so I have this marketing theory that I always use, and it's about saying yes, right? So make it easy for people to say yes. And this is like such a powerful component of that. Like, when we share an experience, it's much easier for me to remember you and to say yes to you, to say yes to having another conversation, to saying yes to speaking on a panel, to saying yes to just like being in community with each other, which then makes the step of me choosing to spend my time with you, investing my time because it's meaningful to me, which is what creates belonging, possible, right? And Sam here is sharing that in her perspective, and I happen to agree, society is moving from conforming to acceptance, which makes the rules looser. And while that is then maybe a challenge in that now there's more spaces, right? So if I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and find these places where I belong, there's more options, which is also can contribute to the pain, right? Because as we're going through this journey and figuring out where we do belong and what we want to own about ourselves and what parts of ourselves are actually dictated by our society or our culture that isn't really a part of us that we need to peel away, there's an opportunity for us to end up in a space that we thought we were going to belong, but we don't actually belong. And then every time that happens, there's an opportunity for us to internalize that, to say, like, there's something wrong with me that makes it not possible for me to fit in anywhere.
Right.
And
right.
it just is, if we have this wider net, I like to call it, like, I talk a lot about digging for gold, right? And like, those guys who are on the gold rush, they dug through a lot of dirt before they found gold. And belonging is gold, right? I think in our world of immediate gratification, maybe we made it seem a little too simple that this is just readily accessible for everybody. But we have to go through our pain journey. We have to learn these things about ourselves. We have to find places where we don't belong in order to figure out where we do. And it's like so important to make that not about you, but part of the journey.
It is part of the journey. And COVID helped us a lot in that, right? Like, I would never want to go through that again, right? But for me, it was very much the reason why I was able to, like I said, I started my journey to belonging when my son was born, because that's when I started to, I'd be like, I got to deal with my pain. But truly, it wasn't until COVID where now, I mean, I was already working from home, but now I was homeschooling my son. I was spending all my time for like literally 18 months in my place. I wasn't traveling at all. I really followed everything to T. But it was the first time in my life I had that time to spend on myself, to focus on unlocking the real me and really figuring out, like, what is your purpose? And doing that hard work. And I can tell you, it is not easy. It is hard work. It's painful. It makes you really sort of question, yourself and the actions that you're doing. And so when I started doing this work, I realized, like, it's liberating to do this work. Like, it is a lot easier to just show up as myself everywhere. And if it's not okay, then maybe I don't belong there. And now much easier for me to pick up on that. So if I go into a new group, for example, and I'm starting to feel like, okay, I don't know if everybody here has got the same sort of, I look at energy, are we in the same sort of, is everybody here doing their work? Is everybody in a growth mindset? Is everybody positive? Like, these are some of the things that I figured out that matter to me, because for a long time, I thought something was wrong with me. Like, I don't fit in. I don't have something that these people want. And then I come to realize, no, it's okay if you don't fit in there. We're not going to fit in everywhere, and it's okay with that, like you said. So we could just go around and talk about this like all day long. You and I could just go back and forth.
We could. And I think one of the things that is coming up for me is we've talked a lot about choice today. We've talked a lot about where we spend our time. And so today, I think a great challenge we can leave everybody with today is, are you choosing time to create belonging? And I think this is just a really great way for each of us to dig into, like, where are we doing that? Because again, this is not a 100% or zero. Everybody will be doing it sometimes, and everybody will be not doing it other times. But where in our lives are we creating time and space to explore what belonging is for us, instead of just being stuck in this, I don't belong, I don't belong, I don't belong. Are you creating time? Are you creating at least as much time to explore how you could belong as you're having that mental conversation about how you don't belong? And look at, like, connect with the people, connect with me, connect with Sejal, connect with the other people in this conversation, because these are the types of people who took 50 minutes of their time today to be in a conversation about belonging. And these are the type of people who will help us feed each other a narrative of belonging, and the fact that we deserve by birthright to belong. That's and right. That we won't all by nature belong in all places. But I know that it's important to have these things. And while Sam is saying, so, like, these skills, right, like of building our resilience, and they're about making the time to do it. That's and right. Instead of waiting to be given the time to do it.
That's right. And can I just add one last thing to what you just said, Tracy? What a great challenge to leave people with. I love that. But I also just want to say too, it is perfectly okay to get support and get help, because, I mean, in my case, I didn't have that available to me. And even now, not everybody does, right? But look for it. there is a lot more of it now than there ever has been. That we can all agree on. Like there is more now support, more resources now. We have the internet. We can jump on Dr. Google, ask for help. There's more people talking about it. They are out there. Like if you don't have anybody in your network that can help you, just go down my feed. Like everybody in my feed is out there willing to help you. Okay. So get support because you're not in this alone. And you could do it at your own pace, right? And you could take your time, but you have to, like Tracy said, make the time to address your pain, to be open and willing to figure out how to move past it, surround yourself with the right people, to figure out how you could just be authentically you. And that's your journey to belonging, right? And this is something that is going to continuously change. As new people come into your life, as old friends leave, as new jobs, new clients, whatever, it's an ongoing process, but get support. Because I think we're taught that we need to be so tough and so strong that we can't ask for help. And I just want to start bashing that myth altogether. You don't have to do this by yourself. There are plenty of people to help you. Get help.
Well, and I actually would even challenge that to the point of like, can we even do it by ourselves? Because I know especially in the pain transformation journey, there's no way I was doing that without a supportive group of people, without people I knew who had my best interest in me, who could just help me probe one level deeper than I can go by myself. And it doesn't have to be a coach, right? It could just be someone in a conversation like this, where we're just exploring and being expansive about what this can look like. And there are so many opportunities for that. And one of the other things I just wanted to frame, because there's lots of people talking about belonging. And as we started the conversation, there's a million different definitions of that. And this is a really great opportunity for you to try on a level of belonging yourself, right? And say, like, is that what I believe? For one, even I thank you for those of you who are like my super fans and come every week. I very much appreciate you. And I believe you come because you think a lot of the same things that I say make sense, right? Like, oh, Tracy's saying these things, they make sense. At some point, I'll say something that you think won't make sense because there's no two people in the entire world who think all of the exact same things unless you're not thinking for yourself, right? And so as you go through this exploration with belonging, you'll hear things that you think sound right, that sound good, that sound factual, and you will hear things that feel wrong, that feel not aligned. And this is part of the belonging journey, is to try on these things and see, yep, I'm aligned with that. Nope, I am not aligned with that. And that doesn't mean, like I said, there's no 100%. Like finding belonging isn't about finding a 100%, but it's about finding enough and then choosing intentionally.
That's right.
So again, like Sejal and I had this conversation before we even came on live. We're like, literally, we could talk about this for like 8 days.
I love it.
And I appreciate that every time I have a guest on this show, they get a new super fan in Andrew. Thanks, Andrew.
Yay.
And I just want to sound, there's like, sometimes it can feel like you have to try on a lot of things to get the right help, because there isn't the right help for all people. There's the right help for you. And there's a level of self-confidence that we build along the way that says like, hey, this feels right. And I think, Sejal, well, let's have this like last quick conversation because I think it's related to belonging. I've made decisions along my path about who were the right people to help me, who were not the right people to help me. And it's correctable, right? Yes. So there's no, sometimes we make the wrong decisions because we can only make the best decision based on the information that we have today. And what I know about everybody in the chat here today is that these are growth-minded people, which means you will know more about yourself tomorrow than you did today, which means you can make different decisions tomorrow. if we never make the choice to choose something, we sit in the not growth zone, and it doesn't get us any closer to belonging. So I just wanted to frame that, because there's like if we wait for the right help, what are we looking for?
That's
what
right.
are we waiting for?
Right. Sometimes even talking to a stranger, Tracy, talking to a stranger. I mean, this is why I love asking the question, how can I support you, or how can I help? Because sometimes we think that when we want to, first of all, it's really hard to ask for help. Like for me, it's really, really hard to ask for help. I try to do everything by myself. But also we assume that the kind of help that we need or want is going to be the same for everybody. Sometimes it's just listening to somebody vent. Sometimes it's just texting them a positive emoji, or, hey, I'm checking in on you. What can I do to support you? Is there an introduction I can make? So there's not like this massive thing of like, if I ask Tracy for help, I'm going to have to put my house on mortgage, right? Like it's not like that. Like sometimes people don't ask the question because they assume like a bomb's going to drop on them or something, right? But sometimes it's just, a lot of times it's just talking about it with somebody, to say, I will make time to talk to you about what's going on in your life, because I care about you. I value you. I see what you're going through, and I have empathy for your situation. Like that can save a life, right? That can literally save a life. And for someone who's feeling that lack of belonging, that one conversation can change their entire journey to belonging. Literally, one conversation can help change the trajectory of their journey to belonging. So keep that in mind as you're having these conversations. It's like the goal is we all want to go towards belonging. So what can you do in that conversation? What can you say? How can you make that person feel so they feel like they belong, at least in that conversation with you, right? Because that'll give them at least a sense of it. Yeah. Oh my God, I love this conversation.
I know, it's so good. And I want to thank you to everyone who is in the chat, because there's a lot. I didn't even put like half of the chats up here because you guys are going too fast for me. But this conversation gets to be so powerful, and what it is, because of your contributions, because of your questions, because of your perspectives. So thank you so much, Sam and Brian and Tim and Andrew, and who else is up here? Candice and Megan. So many awesome contributions in the chat. So thank you so much. And of course, thank you to the wonderful Sejal. Sejal, if people want to know more about you and what you're up to and get in more conversations about belonging, where is the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn. Is the best place to get a hold of me. Connect with me there. If you want to learn more about the workshops that I offer on some of the topics we talked about today, you can look at my website, Train Extra, and reach out. Like, reach out to me, honestly. Like if you just need a friend or something, reach out to me, because I truly believe that we need to support each other, and there's a lot going on in the world, and sometimes it's just too much for anybody. And so, I'm happy to connect and help in whatever way I can. So,
and that's an authentic offer for those of you who are like, oh no, Sejal's too LinkedIn famous, I can't possibly ask her for a conversation. Do it, because every time I have a conversation with you, Sejal, it just like, talk about driving energy, right? I can kill the rest of my day. No problem. All the energy.
I'm going to give you another heart. I'm going to give you the other.
I love you back. And we're figuring out a time where we get to actually connect in person and hug each other. We're going to make
it happen. Yes.
Thank you so much for your contributions today. Thank you, everyone. I encourage you, as always, if the conversation about belonging is important to you, don't let this be the last time you hang out in the conversation. Stay in the conversation. There's many peeps here who would love to be in the conversation with you. Until next time, everybody. Permission to do you.